The sharp slap echoed through business class like a gunshot, instantly silencing every conversation and freezing the clink of champagne glasses. A spoiled rich kid in designer clothes smirked as his manicured hand struck the quiet girl in the worn hoodie square across the face. "Since when do they let the cleaning crew sit up here with us?" he sneered, while his friend pinned her arms and the flight attendant looked the other way. But nobody on that plane realized, not the bullies, not the biased crew, that this girl wasn't some helpless charity case. She was something far more dangerous, forged in years of ruthless discipline and hiding a skill that could end a fight before it even started. In seconds, she turned the narrow aisle into a one-sided battlefield, leaving both entitled thugs crumpled on the floor in pain. Money couldn't buy their way out. The crew protected them. Even the captain sided with wealth over truth. But one quiet elderly passenger had seen every second of it, and he held the kind of undeniable proof that could bring down an entire empire. What followed wasn't just personal revenge. It triggered a chain of events that wiped billions off a major airline's stock in a single day, stripped a billionaire of his throne, and forced the main bully to scrub airport floors in a humiliating neon vest for months. If you love watching arrogant, untouchable brats finally get the crushing karma they deserve, stay tuned. This story delivers justice on a level you've rarely seen.
A lone agent stood behind the priority counter, fingers flying across the keyboard as she awaited the next elite passenger. Riley Quinn entered this hushed sanctuary. She stood out like a smudge on crisp white linen. The 18-year-old wore an old gray hoodie, faded from years of use, paired with sweatpants softened and pilled from endless cycles in the wash. A worn canvas backpack hung heavy on her shoulders, burdened by textbooks and one spare set of clothes. Her sneakers, though wiped clean, carried scuffs at the toes from constant wear. She remained perfectly still, posture straight and unyielding, gaze fixed straight ahead. She paid no attention to the gleaming marble floors or the gold-accented signs. She simply waited patiently behind the yellow line as a sudden disturbance broke out at the entrance to the priority lane. Two young men burst through with the bold swagger of those who had never once been denied anything. Connor Hale led the way. His designer leather jacket alone cost more than Riley's entire savings. Sunglasses rested atop his head, pushing back flawlessly styled blonde hair. Thick gold chains flashed under the bright lights as he pulled a glossy hard-shell suitcase that rolled without a sound. Trailing just behind was Tanner Brooks, a near replica of Connor, but with colder, crueler eyes and less charm. He chewed gum noisily, jaw grinding in a relentless, grating rhythm. Connor halted abruptly upon spotting Riley. He almost stumbled in his costly loafers. Pulling his suitcase to a stop, he stared openly, eyes traveling from her battered sneakers to the hood covering her head. Confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by open revulsion. He turned to Tanner. With a lazy flick of his hand toward Riley, Connor sneered, voice sharp and nasal. "Look at this. Since when do they let the cleaning crew line up in the premium queue?" Tanner snorted. He spat his gum into a tissue and let it fall onto the spotless carpet. Maybe she wandered into the wrong place. "Hey girl, the maintenance closet is back that way." Riley remained motionless, breathing calm and even. Connor's irritation flared. He despised being ignored. He stepped in close, crowding her space, his heavy, musky cologne thick in the air. "I'm talking to you," he snapped, then shoved her shoulder with a quick, contemptuous push. Riley absorbed the force, shifting half a step to steady herself. Slowly, she turned her head, dark eyes locking onto Connor's. "You're in the wrong line," he declared, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger toward the chaotic economy check-in area. "That mess over there is for people like you. This line is for people who actually matter, the ones who pay. Move." "Yeah, get moving," Tanner added, stepping up to flank Connor and create a solid wall of menace. "We're on a schedule. We don't have time to wait while you beg for handouts." Riley adjusted her backpack strap. For the first time she spoke, voice low, steady, and completely flat. "I am next in line." Connor barked a harsh laugh. "Next in line? Look at you. You look like you just climbed out of a trash bin. Do you even know how much a ticket for this lane costs? More than your entire house." He glanced around, hoping for an audience, wanting the agent and security to witness his display. He wanted to be seen as the one restoring proper order to their exclusive domain. Security really should keep the trash out better, he muttered loudly enough for all to hear. Then he seized the strap of Riley's backpack. "I said, move." He yanked hard. Riley whirled, her hand flashed upward and clamped around Connor's wrist. Her grip tightened like iron clamps. Connor gasped. The power in her hand felt inhuman, mechanical. He tried to jerk free, but couldn't budge. "Let go of me," he yelped, face turning crimson. He staggered back, cradling his wrist, fury blazing in his eyes. His ego lay cracked on the floor. "You assaulted me. I'll have you arrested." Before he could raise more chaos, the agent called out, "Next, please." Riley turned away from them and approached the counter. The agent, a weary-eyed woman, regarded Riley with clear doubt, plainly agreeing with Connor's judgment of her appearance. "Ticket and passport," the agent said sharply, tone suggesting she fully expected failure. Riley reached into her pocket and produced a sleek black boarding pass holder, placing it on the counter. The agent opened it, paused, glanced at her screen, then back at Riley. Her attitude shifted at once, skepticism gone, replaced by polished professionalism.
"Thank you, Miss Quinn," the agent said. "Everything is in order. You're assigned to seat 2A, a window in the forward cabin." She printed the baggage tag, returned the documents, and added, "The lounge is to your right. Enjoy your flight." Riley accepted the papers with a single efficient nod. She turned to head toward security, forced to walk past Connor and Tanner. Connor stood rooted in place, mouth slightly agape, eyes fixed on the boarding pass in her hand and its unmistakable gold stripe marking premium access. Riley passed without a glance, treating him like an irrelevant obstacle in the corridor. The automated glass doors to the private security lane parted smoothly for her. She stepped through and vanished from sight. Connor remained behind, shaking with barely contained fury. The sting of public humiliation seared him. He felt the stares from the economy crowd and Tanner's watchful gaze. He had attempted to claim superiority and been brushed aside like an insect. His fingers tightened around the suitcase handle until his knuckles blanched. "She must have stolen that ticket," he whispered through clenched teeth, voice dripping with poison. "No other way. She's a thief." Tanner leaned closer. "Dude, just drop it. She's gone." "No," Connor shot back sharply. He stared at the spot where Riley had disappeared. A vicious scheme took shape in his mind. He faced Tanner, a cold smirk curling his lips. "We're on the same flight, seat 2A. She's stuck in a metal tube with us for 6 hours. He straightened his jacket, ran a hand through his hair, reclaiming his haughty demeanor, while his eyes burned with malice. "She thinks she can humiliate me," he hissed under his breath. "I'll make her regret ever boarding this plane." With that, he strode to the counter and slammed his passport down. The pursuit had begun. The business class cabin of Flight 812 existed in its own refined dimension. Whispered voices, supple leather, and the delicate chime of crystal. The air conditioning purred softly, lulling the privileged into forgetting they were soaring miles above the earth. Riley settled into seat 2A. She stowed her backpack under the seat ahead with precise, deliberate motions. She ignored the offered champagne and declined to test the seat's massage features. Instead, she retrieved a thick, well-worn hardcover from her bag, a detailed human anatomy textbook with frayed edges and dog-eared pages. She opened it and blocked out the surroundings, finding a fleeting sense of calm.
That calm evaporated the instant Connor and Tanner boarded. They barreled in like a disruptive gale, laughter overly loud and gestures overly expansive. Their eyes swept the cabin for amusement. Connor spotted the back of Riley's head and halted, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Well, look who found a seat," he declared loudly, indifferent to who overheard. The freeloader made it aboard. He advanced down the aisle. A middle-aged passenger was just settling into the seat directly behind Riley, 3A. Connor stopped beside him, withdrew a fat roll of $100 bills, and said, "Move, I want this seat." The man looked up, affronted. "Excuse me?" "500, Connor replied, dropping the cash onto the tray table. "Take my spot in row 5 and bring your companion so my friend can have the aisle across." The man paused, glanced at the money, and his outrage dissolved. He collected his belongings and left. Cash commanded obedience in this cabin above all else. Connor dropped heavily into the seat behind Riley, while Tanner claimed 3B opposite. They had her encircled. Riley kept her gaze forward on the skeletal diagram, though every muscle coiled in alertness, sensing the threat behind her. Thud. Connor's knee rammed the back of her seat, a deliberate, sharp impact. She inhaled steadily and turned the page. Thud. Thud. "Hey, Tanner," Connor called out. He leaned in close enough for his breath to graze the back of Riley's neck. "Smell that? Bleach and cheap soap. Looks like housekeeping missed some garbage." Tanner chuckled. "Probably a new welfare perk, business class with food stamps, charity upgrade for the great unwashed." The kicking grew relentless. It turned into a steady barrage. Each time Riley tried to read a line, Connor's foot slammed the seat back, jerking her slightly forward. The physical discomfort was minor, but the mental erosion was calculated. Riley closed the book, set it down gently on the tray, and pressed the call button overhead. A gentle chime sounded. Moments later, Stephanie Cole, the lead flight attendant, appeared. In her 40s, she wore an impeccable uniform and a smile that never warmed her eyes, hair lacquered into flawless place. "How may I assist you, miss?" she asked Riley, voice courteous yet edged with frost.
Stephanie Cole had already sized Riley up the moment she saw the hoodie. "These two passengers are harassing me," Riley said, her voice steady and even. "The one behind me is deliberately kicking my seat. They're making insulting remarks. I'd like to be moved or I'd like them to stop." Stephanie glanced at Riley, then shifted her gaze past her to Connor. Connor flashed a disarming, boyish smile. "Kicking her seat? I was just stretching out, Stephanie. My legs are long. She's overreacting. Probably nervous. Maybe her first flight ever." Stephanie's demeanor softened the instant she looked at him. She noted the gleaming Rolex, the expensive cut of his jacket, and, most crucially, the name on the passenger list. She turned back to Riley, the practiced smile vanishing. "Miss," she whispered sharply, "please don't cause a scene. We have important guests on board. Mr. Hale is the son of one of our airline's largest shareholders." Riley met the flight attendant's eyes without flinching. "Does that give him permission to kick my seat?" "He's only adjusting," Stephanie snapped. "You're fortunate to be in this cabin at all. Don't make me regret it. One more complaint from you, and I'll classify it as disruptive behavior. Understood?" She straightened, smoothed her skirt, and offered Connor a deferential nod. "If there's anything else you need, Mr. Hale, a pillow, perhaps another drink?" "I'm fine, Stephanie," Connor replied with a smug grin. "Just keep the unwanted elements quiet." Stephanie departed, the galley curtains swishing closed behind her. Riley sat isolated in hostile territory. The encounter had only reinforced what she already knew. In this world, justice came with a price tag she wasn't expected to afford. Connor leaned forward once more and delivered a harder kick, sending a sharp jolt through her seat. "See?" he whispered venomously. "No one cares. You're nothing, a speck on my radar. One word from me, and you're off this plane at 30,000 feet. Riley unfastened her seatbelt, rose, and turned to face him fully. She loomed over his seated form. Dim cabin lighting and her reading lamp carved stark shadows across her features. Connor looked up, anticipating tears or pleading. Instead, he met eyes that were deep, unyielding, and unnervingly serene. "Listen carefully," Riley said, her voice quiet, yet carrying over the engine hum like a blade. "I don't care who your father is. I don't care about your money. I'm here for work, not to indulge spoiled brats." She leaned in until her face was inches from his. "Touch my seat again, just once, and you'll discover your father's fortune can't buy replacement bones." The cabin went utterly still. Tanner stopped mid-chew on his gum. Connor's smirk wavered. He searched her gaze for any sign of bluff and found only iron resolve, an unmistakable vow of consequences. For the first time since the airport, his ingrained arrogance flickered. He narrowed his eyes, struggling to reassert control, but an icy dread coiled in his gut. Riley maintained the stare a moment longer, then resumed her seat and reopened her book. The kicking ceased, yet the ensuing quiet hung thick and electric, primed for eruption. The fragile standoff held for 20 minutes, the cabin atmosphere oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Riley focused on her pages again, though every sense stayed heightened. She registered each shift of cloth and muted exchange behind her. Connor seethed in seat 3A, the sting of her warning eating at him like acid. He wasn't accustomed to defiance, especially from someone he deemed inferior. His gaze fell to the gold Rolex Submariner catching the low light, a birthday gift from his father, emblem of the dominance he took for granted. A vicious, petty scheme crystallized. Simple, vicious, foolproof. With deliberate care, he unclasped the watch and eased it from his wrist. He checked. No one watched. He wedged the heavy timepiece deep into the crevice beside his seat cushion until it disappeared. He paused, then erupted. "My watch!" Connor yelled, upturning his tray table. "My Rolex, it's gone!" The outburst shattered the cabin's peace. Heads snapped around. Dozing passengers stirred. Connor launched into frantic theater, patting pockets, flinging blankets to the floor. "It was right here, $50,000 gone." Stephanie materialized immediately, hurrying down the aisle with alarm focused solely on the VIP. "Mr. Hale, what's happened? Are you all right?" she asked, resting a reassuring hand on his arm. "My watch was stolen," Connor declared, pointing dramatically at his bare wrist. "I removed it for a second to clean it, now vanished." Stephanie scanned the area. "Certain it didn't slip somewhere, sir?" "I've looked everywhere," he insisted loudly, then pivoted, jabbing a finger toward the back of Riley's head. "She took it." Riley kept facing forward, jaw tight. "She's been staring at it since the terminal," Connor lied, voice carrying to the rear rows.
"I saw her eyeing it," Connor continued loudly. "She probably grabbed it while I was reaching for my drink. Search her bag." Stephanie turned to Riley, her expression turning rigid. The polite facade evaporated, replaced by raw bias. She advanced on seat 2A. "Miss," Stephanie said sharply, "it wasn't a request, it was an order. Stand up." Riley marked her page, closed the book, and rose slowly. "I didn't touch his watch," she stated evenly. "I haven't left the seat or turned around once." "Liar!" Connor spat. "You're the only one close enough. Who else could it be? Tanner? He has his own. It was you, probably planning to sell it for rent." Stephanie towered over Riley. "Miss, this is a grave accusation. Theft aboard an aircraft is a federal crime. Step into the aisle and hand over your backpack." "No," Riley replied, voice cool and firm. "I took nothing. You have no legal right to search my belongings without a warrant or real probable cause." Stephanie let out a short, humorless laugh. "Probable cause? We're at 30,000 feet, dear." "I'm in charge here, and right now probable cause is a VIP missing an expensive item, while the only passenger who appears desperate for cash sits right in front of him." The naked insult lingered heavily. "Open the bag," Stephanie ordered, reaching toward the overhead bin where Riley had stowed her backpack. Riley rose faster, placing her hand firmly on the latch and blocking access. "Do not touch my property," she warned. Stephanie jerked back, startled by the resistance. "Are you threatening crew?" she demanded. "I can have this plane diverted and the FBI waiting on landing." "Do you want prison over a watch?"
Return it now, and perhaps Mr. Hale will kindly drop the charges. I don't have it, Riley repeated clearly. Search his seat, search the floor, but you will not touch my bag. You're only making this worse, Stephanie hissed. She closed in, violating Riley's space in an attempt to cow her. People like you always believe you can skate by. You think a flute ticket means you belong here? You don't. Move aside or I'll call male crew to restrain you physically. Connor lingered behind Stephanie, a satisfied smirk on his face, savoring the sight of authority handling his vendetta. Just check her already, he urged. She's probably stuffed it in those filthy clothes. The cabin air grew thick with tension. Riley held her position, isolated against the combined force of airline rules and old money. Her hands clenched at her sides, not from intent to strike, but from sheer self-control. She knew any physical response now would cost her the higher ground. Yet she wasn't the only observer. Across the aisle in seat 4D, a blanket stirred. Judge Harold Bennett had been lightly dozing, but the raised voices roused him. The 70-year-old adjusted his glasses, dressed in a plain cardigan like any grandfather heading to see family. He remained silent for now. He sat motionless, observant as a predator in wait. He noted Connor's smug expression, Stephanie's hostile stance, Riley's upright and dignified posture amid the attack. He also noticed the seat cushion gap where Connor's hand had lingered moments before the supposed theft. Judge Harold Bennett quietly withdrew his iPad from the seat pocket. He activated the screen and opened the camera, holding the device naturally against his chest so the lens discreetly recorded both video and audio of the confrontation. The judge had quietly entered the proceedings, though the accused remained oblivious. The scent of roasted tenderloin and truffle oil wafted through the cabin, unsuccessfully masking the poisonous atmosphere. The attempted search ended in impasse. Recognizing her lack of authority to forcible search without the captain's explicit order, Stephanie retreated to the galley. The harm, however, was already inflicted. Lines had been drawn. The cabin had become a stage, with every passenger an audience member. Riley returned to her seat in silence, untouched meal ignored. Her appetite had disappeared the instant threats were issued. She gazed out at the endless clouds, mentally cycling through breathing drills honed over years. Inhale 4 counts, hold 4, exhale 4. Control remained her sole remaining weapon. Connor, by contrast, possessed no such restraint. 2 rows back, he nursed a glass of rich Cabernet Sauvignon. The moment Stephanie left, he'd fished the watch from its hiding place and slid it back on his wrist with a private grin. Time didn't interest him. Retribution did. The girl had humiliated him, threatened him, and now dared ignore him entirely? That was unforgivable. He stood, wineglass precariously in hand. "Gotta stretch my legs," he told Tanner casually. He started up the aisle, gait confident and predatory. As he neared seat 2A, he didn't slow or excuse himself. Riley sensed the approach and braced for more verbal abuse. She didn't anticipate the physical escalation. Passing her shoulder, Connor flicked his wrist in a subtle, concealed motion. The deep red wine arced through the air. It splashed across Riley's chest in a dark wave, instantly saturating her oversized white hoodie. Droplets hit her face and dripped down her chin like blood. The rest pooled in her lap, destroying the calm of her space. Connor halted, feigning wide-eyed surprise. "Oops," he said, sarcasm thick. "Hand slipped. Turbulence, you know?" Riley sat motionless as the cold liquid soaked through to her skin, the sharp scent of fermented grapes overwhelming. Connor bent close, voice low enough for only her ears, laced with pure malice. "Actually, don't bother cleaning it. The dark red suits your skin tone better anyway. Call it an improvement."
Before Riley could move, Stephanie Cole appeared as if summoned. She had witnessed the spill from the galley. "Oh my goodness!" Stephanie gasped, hurrying forward with a stack of linen napkins. Yet she made no move toward Riley. Instead, she went straight to Connor. "Mr. Hale, are you okay?" she asked anxiously, gently dabbing at a minuscule red speck on his leather sleeve. "I'm so sorry. That must have been awful. Did any get on your shoes?" "It's all right, Stephanie," Connor replied with an exaggerated sigh, portraying the gracious sufferer. "I just stumbled. The aisle's so narrow. People shouldn't let their elbows jut out like that." Stephanie whirled on Riley, eyes flashing with outrage that belonged elsewhere. "Look at the trouble you've caused," she scolded. "You made him spill a $50 glass of wine. Can't you stay still? You're interrupting the entire service." Riley regarded the woman calmly. The reversal was bordering on absurd. She was the one soaked, sticky, and degraded, yet faulted for the trajectory of liquid deliberately flung by another. She chose silence. Debate required an audience open to reason, and none existed here. She rose. Wine dripped from the ham onto the carpet. She grasped the zipper of her ruined hoodie. "What do you think you're doing?" Stephanie snapped. "Keep your clothes on. This isn't a changing room." Riley paid no attention. She pulled the zipper down and peeled away the heavy, saturated fabric. She balled it up and let it fall onto the tray table with a sodden thump. Beneath, she wore a plain black t-shirt, faded at the seams from years of wear. Across the back, in bold, cracked white letters, was an emblem, a clenched iron fist encircled by Korean characters. Below the symbol read, "Iron Fist Dojo, Oakland." It was no trendy label or chain gym. It was one of the most demanding, respected, and feared martial arts academies on the West Coast. A forge that shaped warriors, not mere exercisers. A place legendary for testing limits and building unbreakable spirit. Riley stood in the t-shirt, revealing arms sculpted with lean, powerful muscle the hoodie had concealed. A faint scar traced her right tricep, a memento from sparring against a national champion. She met Connor's eyes, offering him one clear opportunity to truly see her, to acknowledge the danger signal now exposed. Connor glanced at the shirt and scoffed. "Cute shirt. What is that, some free karate class for underprivileged kids? Did it come with a participation belt from the food bank?" His arrogance blinded him completely. He failed to recognize the apex predator now revealed. Riley collected her amenity kit. "I'm going to the lavatory to clean up," she stated flatly. "Do not speak to me again." She turned and walked forward, past the galley, toward the private restroom near the cockpit. Connor watched her leave, fresh humiliation gnawing at him. He glanced at Tanner, who was still nursing his drink. "She thinks that karate shirt makes her tough. Let's find out how tough she really is when nobody's around." He nodded toward the front of the aircraft. "Come on. She'll have to come out eventually." Tanner grinned, unfastened his seatbelt, and rose. The two followed Riley into the narrow, secluded passageway at the front of the plane. In the lavatory mirror, Riley saw a face etched with unyielding resolve. She scrubbed the last clinging traces of Cabernet from her neck using rough paper towels. Cold water ran, but her skin burned. A faint purple stain remained on the collar of her black t-shirt, resembling an ugly bruise. She studied her reflection. Her eyes held the deep, practiced tranquility of countless hours of training. Master Liam Chen's voice resounded in her memory, the mantra repeated thousands of times on the mats. "Emotion is leakage. Anger is waste. Seal the vessel." She drew a slow breath, inhaling the sharp mix of industrial cleaner and recycled air, exhaling the impulse to shatter Connor's nose. She was a senior instructor trainee. She carried the reputation of the Iron Fist. A true warrior did not stoop to fighting petulant children 30,000 feet in the air. Riley crushed the paper towel and dropped it in the bin. She unlocked the door and stepped into the tight corridor. Her route back was blocked. Connor leaned casually against the wall directly ahead. Tanner stood behind him, cutting off escape toward the galley. The space was cramped, barely room for a cart. Engine noise thrummed louder here, a relentless vibration that absorbed all quieter sounds. They had engineered a trap. Connor idly swirled a fresh glass of whiskey. Ice cubes tinkled softly against the glass, contrasting the mechanical roar. His gaze was hazy with liquor and spite. "All clean now?" he taunted, shifting his shoulder to extruct her completely. Riley halted, feet planted shoulder-width, weight balanced. "Excuse me," she said evenly. "I need to return to my seat."
"We're not done here," Connor sneered, taking a deliberate sip from his glass and letting the uncomfortable silence drag on. "You turned your back while I was still speaking to you. That's unbelievably rude. In my world, people like you wait to be dismissed." "I'm not one of your people," Riley answered, her voice low and edged with unmistakable warning. "And I'm not playing whatever game this is." "Or what?" Tanner cut in mockingly from behind, edging closer until Riley could smell the stale peanut residue on his breath. "You planning to karate chop us? High kick in those filthy sneakers?" Connor let out a sharp laugh and placed his glass on the narrow service ledge to free both hands. He crowded even further into her space, breaching that critical foot of personal boundary and triggering every trained alarm in her body. "You really don't get it," he hissed, his features twisting into open contempt and loathing. "You think swapping shirts suddenly puts you on our level. It doesn't. You're nothing more than a quota filler, a pity ticket wasting a seat that belongs to people who actually matter." He jabbed a rigid finger forcefully into her chest. "You're nothing," he spat with venom. "You're dirt, and dirt gets stepped on." Riley glanced briefly at the spot he'd prodded, the layered insult to her background, her race, her very right to exist ignited a fire deep inside. Heat flooded her veins, muscles tensed involuntarily, primed to unleash a strike that could cave his ribs in a heartbeat. Still, she held. The legal reality was unforgiving. Initiating force would paint her as the attacker. She needed them to cross that final irreversible line. "This is your last warning," she stated calmly, eyes locked on the vulnerable line of Connor's throat. "Step aside now. I have no desire to hurt you." Connor's eyes widened in theatrical fear before he erupted in mocking laughter. "Did you catch that, Tanner? She doesn't want to hurt us." He snapped his fingers sharply. Tanner reacted instantly with an awkward, untrained lunge, wrapping his arms around Riley from behind and pinning her as tightly to her sides. He leaned his full weight forward, attempting to immobilize her completely. "Hold her steady," Connor commanded with smug authority. Riley stiffened deliberately, arms locked, but her legs and hips remained fully operational. At the dojo, this kind of hold was the most basic error a novice could make. She could easily crush Tanner's instep under her heel, drive her skull backward into his nose, or drop her weight and flip him over her hip. She chose none of those options. She waited patiently for the moment they committed beyond recall. "Let go of me," she said, her tone so cold the narrow corridor seemed to chill noticeably. "Make me," Tanner grunted, cinching his grip tighter. Connor stood inches away, basking in the rush of apparent total control. This was the dominance he craved. He searched her defiant gaze for any flicker of terror. Instead, he found only coiled readiness. The complete absence of fear infuriated him further. It was a direct insult to his perceived power. He raised his open hand high. Drawing it back with obvious wind-up, he shouted, "Learn your place!" and swung full force. The slap cracked viciously against the side of Riley's face, whipping her head sharply to the side. The sharp report bounced off the confined plastic walls like a gunshot. It was unmistakable skin-on-skin violence. Everything froze for a breath. A burning sting exploded across her cheek. A shrill ringing filled her ear. The coppery taste of blood from a split lip spread across her tongue. Connor stood breathing hard, his palms smarting from the impact, a triumphant smile forming as he waited for sobs or pleas. Instead, Riley turned her head slowly back to center. All traces of restraint vanished from her expression, the practiced civility, the forced humanity, the unspoken agreement that kept society from descending into chaos. The slap hadn't broken her spirit. It had removed the final barrier. She fixed her eyes on Connor. A chilling, absolute calm settled over her faces, the detached focus of an executioner confirming a blade's edge.
"Thank you," she whispered softly. Connor's triumphant grin wavered. "What? You just committed the first strike." The change was immediate and total. The quiet girl who had absorbed endless insults in line, who had endured slurs about her clothes and heritage, was gone. In her place stood a living weapon, forged through countless hours of sweat-soaked discipline. Tanner registered the shift first. The arms he held no longer resisted. They turned rigid as steel beams. Riley subtly lowered her center of gravity 2 inches, planting herself like an immovable post. Then she stomped backward with explosive piston-like power. Her heel smashed precisely into the fragile arch of Tanner's foot. He gasped in shock, his hold loosening for the briefest instant. That fraction of a second was enough. Riley's arms surged upward. Instead of brute forcing his arms apart, she isolated his left pinky and twisted it backward against the joint with flawless, surgical precision. A distinct snap rang out. Tanner let out a high, piercing scream that sliced through the constant engine roar. He released her immediately, clutching his mangled hand and staggering back against the galley wall, face ashen as blinding pain consumed him. Riley spun fluidly to face forward, completely free. Connor stared first at his writhing friend, then at her, his mind reeling to catch up with the sudden reversal. Raw fury overwhelmed any trace of rational thought.
Connor let out a primal roar of thwarted privilege and charged at her. He threw a wild right hook, a clumsy haymaker aimed straight at her temple. It was sluggish, blatantly telegraphed, utterly amateur. To Riley, he seemed to move in slow motion, as if underwater. She didn't back away. Instead, she advanced into the strike, raising her left arm to deliver a sharp outer block that deflected his wrist and sent a jarring shock up his forearm. At the instant same, her right leg whipped out in a classic ashibarai foot sweep. Her instep caught Connor's ankle precisely as he shifted his weight forward. Gravity did the rest. His legs were swept away, and he crashed heavily to the floor. The impact drove the air from his lungs. His head thudded dully against the thin carpet. Before he could gasp for breath or scramble up, Riley dropped fluidly onto one knee. She pinned his upper arm to the floor with her shin across his biceps, seized his wrist, and twisted it into a textbook ude hishigi arm lock. She applied controlled pressure to the elbow joint, enough to produce excruciating pain without fracturing bone. "Stay down," she ordered, voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Connor thrashed wildly, trying to throw her off. Riley increased pressure by the tiniest fraction. He let out a high-pitched shriek. "My arm! You're breaking it!" "I'm controlling it," she corrected, tone ice cold. "If I wanted it broken, it would already be in pieces." She glanced upward. Tanner, having partially recovered, charged again in blind desperation at the sight of his friend pinned. Riley didn't rise. There was no need. Maintaining the lock on Connor, she snapped her free leg out in a precise side-thrust kick that buried into Tanner's solar plexus. He doubled over instantly, collapsing to his knees, wheezing helplessly, hands clutching his midsection as breath refused to return. The entire encounter lasted 7 seconds. Riley remained kneeling over Connor, her breathing only slightly quicker than normal. This was no street fight to her. It was routine evening sparring, ingrained muscle memory from 12 relentless years of training. She wasn't merely some scholarship kid. She was a sandan, a third-degree black belt. Her childhood had been spent on tatami mats, enduring strikes far more punishing than anything these boys could deliver. She was aboard this flight because Master Liam Chen, head of the Iron Fist Federation, had personally chosen her as an advanced instructor trainee for the national team. She was a prodigy of iron discipline, hidden beneath a simple hoodie. These entitled boys had mistaken a shark for harmless prey in shallow waters. Connor whimpered beneath her. "Get off me. Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly what you are," Riley replied. She leaned closer, tightening the lock fractionally. A bully who just discovered he's not the strongest one here. Suddenly, the lavatory door clicked and swung open. The commotion had jammed the handle earlier, but it gave way now. Simultaneously, the galley curtain was yanked aside. Witnesses flooded the cramped space. Stephanie Cole, other crew members, and more than a dozen business-class passengers, including Judge Harold Bennett. They had rushed forward at the sounds of screams, expecting to find the quiet girl battered and crying. Instead, they beheld a scene of complete reversal and domination. Tanner lay curled feetally on the floor, struggling for air. Connor was immobilized, expensive jacket rumpled, face mashed into the carpet, helplessly restrained by the young woman everyone had previously dismissed. Riley looked up calmly. Her face showed no guilt or panic, only the serene composure of justified retribution. "He slipped," she said evenly, meeting Stephanie's eyes directly. A stunned hush gripped the corridor. Then Stephanie's shrill voice shattered it. "Get away from him," she screamed, lunging forward not to help the injured but to protect the fallen privileged. Riley stepped back smoothly, raising open palms to signal the end of conflict. Her breathing stayed even amid the rising uproar. Connor scrambled backward on the floor, cradling his elbow. Initial shock gave way to calculated outrage he immediately weaponized. "She's insane," he shouted, face twisted into practiced terror. He pointed a shaking finger at Riley. "She just lost it. We were waiting for the restroom and she attacked us out of nowhere. Look what she did to my arm. I'd think it's broken." Tanner, still gasping on the floor, nodded frantically between labored breaths. "She knows some kind of kung fu. She tried to kill us." The false accusation hung thick and toxic. "Don't move, you," ordered Stephanie, finger trembling with fury. She snatched the wall-mounted intercom handset. "Captain, to the forward galley immediately. We have a passenger assault in progress." Whispers of alarm rippled through the cabin. Passengers strained to see, eyes wide with instinctive fear and morbid fascination. In that moment, the story was being shaped by whoever spoke loudest. Two expensively dressed young men as victims, the composed girl in the black t-shirt as dangerous threat.
Moments later, the cockpit door swung open with authority. Captain Ellis emerged, a tall and imposing figure with silver-streaked hair and the tired but unquestioned command of a seasoned aviator who had seen every kind of in-flight crisis. He absorbed the entire chaotic tableau in one swift, professional glance. The apparently distraught son of a powerful shareholder, his shaken companion, and the lone young woman standing composed in the center of it all. He required no extended investigation or conflicting statements. He required only an immediate and decisive fix to protect his flight, his crew, and his career. "Report," Captain Ellis barked curtly, his gaze fixed firmly on Riley. "She viciously attacked Mr. Hale and his friend," Stephanie replied breathlessly, dropping to one knee beside Connor and pressing a clean towel into his hand. "It was completely unprovoked, Captain. Absolutely brutal. Just look at the state they're in." Ellis shifted his attention to Connor. "You holding up all right, son?" "She nearly ripped my arm out of its socket," Connor whimpered, squeezing out a few calculated tears for effect. "My father is going to hear every detail of this. She's completely unhinged. I demand she be arrested the moment we land." The invocation of the father's name landed exactly as intended. Ellis was well aware of which family's contributions kept the airline's engines turning and routes profitable. He turned back to Riley, his expression solidifying into cold stone. In her, he saw only potential disaster, a lawsuit waiting to happen, a headline that could jeopardize his pension and reputation. "Turn around," he ordered flatly. "Hands behind your back." Riley met his eyes without flinching. "Captain, I was defending myself. They cornered me in this corridor. They initiated the physical contact. They struck me first." "I don't need your version," Ellis cut her off sharply, contempt lacing every word. "You assaulted paying passengers on my aircraft. That's classified as air piracy or terrorism under federal regulations." He reached to his belt and withdrew heavy-duty plastic zip ties, the kind reserved for violent drunks or genuine security threats. "Turn around immediately, or I'll authorize the crew to use tasers and force compliance." The injustice was complete and suffocating, a thick layer smothering any trace of truth.
Riley glanced once at the captain, then at Stephanie's triumphant glare, and finally at Connor, who allowed himself the faintest smug twitch behind his mask of victimhood. The entire system was rallying instinctively to protect its privileged circle. Riley turned slowly and deliberately, placing her wrists together at the small of her back. She would not escalate a physical confrontation with the captain. That was a losing battle on every level. She allowed the restraints to be applied, the sharp, final zip of plastic slicing through the tense quiet like a single gunshot in a confined space. "Escort her to the rear jump seat and secure her there," Ellis instructed the co-pilot who had followed him out. "Contact the tower immediately. Request airport police and FBI presence at the gate. I want her removed in full restraints the second the door opens." Stephanie shot Riley a venomous, victorious glare. "Better get comfortable with prison food, honey." The co-pilot stepped forward to grasp Riley's arm, ready to parade her down the aisle as visible proof that order had been decisively restored. Most passengers watched in muted approval, some even nodding at the swift handling of the perceived threat. But before the co-pilot could move, a deep and resonant voice cut cleanly through the charged atmosphere. It carried no hysteria, no raised volume, only the unmistakable weight of lifelong authority. "If you so much as lay a finger on that young woman, Captain, I will pursue litigation against this airline until the only thing left for you to pilot is a paper airplane." The constant thrum of the engines seemed momentarily subdued, overpowered by the sheer gravity of the speaker. It was not shouted, it was delivered as indisputable fact. Captain Ellis spun around, face flushing with fresh irritation at yet another challenge to his command in mere minutes. He fully expected some overzealous, possibly intoxicated passenger playing hero. "Return to your seat, sir," he snapped, jabbing an accusatory finger toward the older man, now rising from row 4. "This is an active security incident. Interference will get you restrained as well." Judge Harold Bennett did not sit back down. He did not flinch or raise his voice. He merely adjusted the cuffs of his simple beige cardigan with measured precision and stepped calmly into the aisle, his movements graceful and unhurried despite his age. "Judge Harold Bennett," said, his tone dry and precise as rustling autumn leaves, "I advise you to lower that finger immediately unless you wish to add assault on a passenger to this already regrettable situation in front of more than 30 witnesses." Ellis hesitated, momentarily unsettled by the man's unflappable demeanor. "Identify yourself." The judge reached smoothly into his breast pocket. He produced a thick, cream-colored business card and extended it not directly to the captain, but into the neutral space between them, an undeniable presentation of truth. Ellis grabbed it brusquely, ready to dismiss whatever it was. Then recognition hit. His eyes widened dramatically as blood drained from his face under the harsh cabin lighting. The card bore the embossed seal of the judiciary and read, "The Honorable Harold Bennett, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the State of New York, retired, former Chair, Civil Rights Oversight Committee." Ellis looked up slowly, all trace of bluster replaced by the dawning horror of standing on extremely thin ice. "Judge Bennett," he managed, voice faltering, "I wasn't aware you were on this flight." "That much is obvious," the judge replied evenly. He advanced one deliberate step, compelling Ellis to yield ground involuntarily. "Had you known my identity, perhaps you might have conducted a proper inquiry instead of blindly accepting the word of a spoiled 20-year-old delinquent and a negligent crew member." Stephanie let out an audible gasp. "Sir, The judge silenced her with nothing more than a subtle shift of posture, never even glancing her way. "I have been seated in 4D for the duration of this flight, over 3 hours. I have witnessed every relevant event. I observed that young man," he stated, extending a gnarled but steady finger toward Connor, "repeatedly and deliberately kick this young woman's seat for a full 20 minutes.
I watched him intentionally splash wine across her. I watched him and his companion follow her toward the lavatory. He turned his unflinching gaze to Riley, who remained bound, yet stood tall and composed. And I personally witnessed them corner her in this confined space, Judge Harold Bennett continued, his voice building in controlled intensity. They placed hands on her first. She responded with extraordinary restraint and textbook discipline. The only individuals committing crimes on this aircraft are the two currently on the floor and the one still wearing a crew uniform. He concluded with a brief pointed gesture toward Stephanie.
This woman actively enabled the harassment, Judge Harold Bennett declared, his words landing with the unyielding force of a gavel. She refused to intervene when it was her duty to ensure passenger safety. She chose sides based solely on perceived wealth rather than facts or fairness. That makes her, at minimum, an accessory to assault. Connor, who had been cradling his elbow on the floor, suddenly pushed himself upright. Recognition flashed across his face, the name, the features. "Judge Bennett," he said in a high, hopeful squeak. "It's me, Connor Hale. You know my father, Alexander Hale. You attended his charity gala last summer." This was Connor's lifeline, his network, his assumed safety net. Surely the judge would side with their shared world. Judge Harold Bennett turned his steel-gray eyes on the young man, the gaze withering and absolute. "Yes, Connor, I do know your father," he replied softly. "Alexander Hale is a formidable businessman, ruthless in deals but disciplined in his operations. He built his empire on structure and control." Connor managed a weak, relieved smile, certain he was protected. "Exactly. So you'll tell them to arrest her? She's dangerous." "You are a fool," the judge cut in, the words precise and devastating. "I know your father well enough to understand that he despises weakness above all else, and you, young man, embody weakness. You attack a woman in pairs, you hide behind inherited money, you invoke his name as protection because you have built no reputation of your own." Connor's fleeting smile evaporated. "I'm not merely a witness," Judge Harold Bennett continued, voice steady and commanding. "I am an officer of the court, and I will testify personally against you. I will ensure your father learns exactly how his son conducts himself when he believes no one of consequence is watching." The judge turned back to the captain. Tension crackled through the cabin like static before lightning. "Captain Ellis," he said clearly, "you face two paths. Option 1, you leave those restraints on the actual victim. When we land, I will lodge a formal complaint with the FAA. I will represent this young woman pro bono in a civil action for false imprisonment and civil rights violations, and I will name you individually as a defendant." He paused, allowing the weight to settle. Option 2, you remove those zip ties at once, restrain the true aggressors, and hope this young woman shows more mercy toward your career than you have shown to justice. Captain Ellis glanced at the plastic binding Riley's wrists, then at the trembling Connor, and finally at the judge's unflinching stare. The calculation was stark. One side offered money, the other truth, backed by a man who had spent decades dismantling careless legal arguments. Ellis drew a small folding knife from his belt pocket. "Caught them," he ordered the co-pilot sharply. "But, Captain," Stephanie began. "I said cut them," Ellis roared, frustration finally erupting toward a safe target. He fixed Stephanie with a furious glare and returned to the galley. "You are relieved of all duties for the remainder of the flight." The co-pilot quickly sliced through the ties. Riley's hands dropped free. She massaged the red marks on her wrists as circulation returned. She looked toward Judge Harold Bennett. No smile crossed her face, but she inclined her head in a settled, respectful bow, a gesture of one disciplined warrior acknowledging another. The judge returned a slight nod. He then shifted his attention to Connor and Tanner. The two young men shrank against the cabin wall, the bravado gone. The rules had changed irrevocably. The official was no longer for sale. The seatbelt sign pinged on with its usual cheerful chime, a jarring moment to the heavy mood. Flight 812 began its descent, engines winding down as the cabin tilted gently toward the ground below. For Connor, the sensation mirrored a plunge into darkness. He slumped in seat 3A, cradling his aching elbow. Tanner sat beside him, pale and mute, staring at his splinted and iced finger. The cocky entitlement that had defined them at departure had dissolved, leaving only raw, anxious fear. Connor's mind spun frantically. He had escaped consequences before. Lawyers and money always fixed things. It was still his word against hers. The old judge was an obstacle, but elderly witnesses could be discredited, painted as confused or senile. Then icy realization hit. His phone. Tucked in his jacket pocket was his latest iPhone. Earlier, he had recorded parts of the harassment for bragging rights, kicking her seat, Tanner blocking the path, intended for a private group chat called The Elite. Now, those clips were self-incriminating evidence. His hand trembled as he retrieved the device, keeping it low and shielded. Thumb hovering over the gallery, he selected and deleted, exhaling in temporary relief. He opened the recently deleted folder to purge permanently. "Digital evidence has a habit of lingering, Connor," a calm voice observed from across the aisle. Connor froze. Judge Harold Bennett sat with his iPad on the tray table, gazing over his glasses, not at the screen, but directly at the young man. The expression held no rage, only profound disappointment, which somehow got deeper. I was just checking messages," Connor stammered, finger still poised over delete all. "By all means," the judge replied with a dismissive gesture. "Delete away. Destroy the phone entirely if it pleases you. It changes nothing." He tapped his iPad screen and raised the volume to maximum. Harsh static gave way to unmistakable audio filling the cabin. "Smells like bleach and cheap detergent." Connor's voice clear and sneering. His blood turned to ice. Tanner's laughter followed, then the hollow acoustics of the forward corridor. "You are nothing. You are dirt, and dirt belongs on the floor." The cabin collectively flinched at the next sound, a wet, heavy thwack of the slap, loud and indisputable. It was immediately chased by Tanner's high-pitched scream as his finger snapped. Judge Harold Bennett paused the recording.
The silence that flooded back into the cabin was total and oppressive. Even the steady drone of the engine seemed muted in deference. "I do enjoy audiobooks," Judge Harold Bennett remarked in a casual, almost conversational tone, snapping his iPad cover shut with a soft click. "But I have always preferred nonfiction. I began recording the moment you chose to treat this cabin as your private stage for bullying." Connor stared at the dark leather case of the tablet as though it were a loaded weapon. That single device now controlled his future, his reputation, the privileged existence he had always taken for granted. "That's illegal," he whispered desperately, clutching at any defense. "You can't record someone without consent." "On the contrary," the judge corrected, leaning forward slightly. "In a public area with no reasonable expectation of privacy, such as an aircraft aisle during a public disturbance, recording is entirely permissible. Furthermore, this captures the commission of a felony." Riley sat 2 rows ahead, listening without turning. She had no need to watch. The crushing weight of irrefutable evidence was doing the work for her. Judge Harold Bennett unbuckled his seatbelt as the landing gear dropped with a resounding thud. He leaned across the aisle until his face was close to Connor's. The kindly grandfatherly air had vanished, replaced by the unforgiving steel of judicial authority. "You see, simple assault is merely a misdemeanor, a minor inconvenience. Your father's attorneys could resolve that before dessert." He tapped the iPad screen once more. "But the racial slurs, the targeted harassment based on ethnicity, combined with physical violence—" A thin, chilling smile touched his lips, one that promised utter ruin. "That elevates the matter to a federal hate crime, young man. Mandatory minimum sentences, no early release, and family wealth is worthless inside federal prison." The tires screamed against the tarmac of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the harsh screech echoing the raw tension inside the cabin.
As the aircraft braked hard with reversed thrusters, solid ground became reality once more. For Riley, landing meant stepping back onto a different kind of battlefield. For Connor, it signaled rescue. The instant the plane cleared the active runway, he frantically pulled out his phone and dialed the one contact that had always erased his mistakes. "Dad!" he whispered urgently into the device, voice quivering with practiced pain and victimhood. "Dad, listen, I'm injured, seriously. Some crazy girl from economy attacked us. She broke my arm. She's some kind of martial artist, completely deranged." He paused, listening to the furious, distorted shouting leaking from the earpiece, audible even to Riley 2 rows forward. "Yeah, we're taxiing now," Connor continued, eyes flicking toward Riley with renewed spite. "The captain's backing me, but there's this old guy making trouble. He has recordings. You have to stop this, Dad. I can't go to jail." Relief visibly washed over his pallid features as he ended the call, a smug twist returning to his mouth. "My legal team is already waiting at the gate," Connor announced loudly to the entire cabin. He glanced at Tanner. "Dad spoke to the police commissioner. This is over." The seatbelt sign chimed off. Normally, that triggered a mad scramble for bags. Today, no one stirred. Every passenger remained seated, transfixed by the unfolding final scene. The plane reached the gate with a gentle jolt. The jet bridge connected with a mechanical groan. The forward door opened. 2 ground agents stepped aside as a phalanx of uniformed officers poured in. 4 patrolmen led by a broad-shouldered chief with a severe buzz cut and commanding presence. Their arrival seemed to draw the air from the cabin, radios crackling and equipment clinking. Stephanie Cole, who had lingered out of sight in the galley, seized her moment for vindication. She straightened her uniform and strode forward, pointing dramatically at Riley. "Officers!" she cried, with voice shrill with urgency. "Thank heaven you're here! That's her! Seat 2A, the girl in the black shirt. She assaulted these 2 young men. She's violent and dangerous." Connor rose, cradling his arm theatrically. "I was trying to kill me," he whined, advancing toward the police. "I want charges filed immediately. My father is Alexander Hale. He insists she be taken into custody right now." Chief Marcus Reed halted in the center of the business class aisle. He surveyed Connor, the apparently distraught Tanner, and Stephanie's frantic gesturing. Then his eyes moved beyond them all. He did not focus on Connor. He fixed on the older gentleman in the simple cardigan, calmly stowing his iPad into a leather case. The chief's stern mask dissolved into genuine surprise and recognition. He bypassed Connor's extended hand entirely and walked straight past Stephanie as if she were invisible. He stopped before seat 4D. "Judge Bennett?" Chief Marcus Reed asked, voice softened with respect rather than command. Judge Harold Bennett looked up, adjusted his glasses, and studied the badge before a warm, knowing smile spread across his lined face. "Marcus," the judge replied, "or rather Chief Reed now. It's been years since you occupied the front row of my constitutional law class." The cabin plunged in stunned silence. Connor's mouth fell open. Stephanie staggered back a step, hand rising to her lips. 10 years, Your Honor," Reed answered, removing his cap. "I had no idea you were traveling through." "Just passing through, Marcus," Judge Harold Bennett said, rising and placing a familiar hand on the chief's shoulder.
"But it appears I've landed in the midst of a jurisdictional misunderstanding," Judge Harold Bennett continued. Chief Marcus Reed straightened, the reverence lingering but the professional officer fully resurfacing. "Dispatch reported a violent assault. 2 victims, 1 assailant." "Technically accurate," the judge replied, his tone sharpening like tempered steel. He extended a steady finger toward Connor and Tanner. "Except dispatch identified the wrong parties. Those 2 are the perpetrators. The young woman is the victim." "He's lying," Connor burst out, panic surging like acid in his throat. "He's in league with her. My father already contacted the commissioner." Chief Marcus Reed turned slowly, fixing Connor with a stare intense enough to strip varnish from wood. "Son," he said, voice low and edged with menace, "the man you just accused of lying spent 30 decades on the bench making certain officers like me upheld the law without favor.
If Judge Bennett declares you the offender, that's all the probable cause I require." Reed signaled his team with a curt gesture toward the premium seats. "Cuff them." The metallic snap of handcuffs rang out like twin gunshots in the hushed cabin. It was a crisp, conclusive sound, marking the close of argument and the dawn of accountability. Officer Frost, built like a heavyweight with forearms thick as beams, seized Connor's wrist without ceremony or gentleness, no deference for supposed VIP status. He wrenched the arm behind Connor's back with practiced efficiency, pressing the young man's chest firmly against the bulkhead. "You're making a huge mistake!" Connor shrieked, cheek mashed against the plastic panel. "Do you have any idea who my father is? He owns this airline. He owns all of you." "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Frost intoned flatly, reciting the Miranda warning with the weary rhythm of countless repetitions. "I strongly suggest you exercise it." Across the aisle, Tanner offered no resistance. He crumpled inwardly. As the second officer secured his hands, Tanner dissolved into raw, choking sobs that stripped away every remnant of bravado. He resembled nothing so much as a frightened child awaiting inevitable punishment for a catastrophic mistake. "Please," Tanner whimpered between heaving breaths, "I didn't really do anything. It was all him. It was Connor." Connor strained against the hold to glare sideways. "Shut your mouth, Tanner. Not another word. My lawyers will tear them apart." Chief Marcus Reed paid the outburst no mind. He stood immovable amid the turmoil, gaze settled on Riley with calm professionalism. "Miss," he said gently, "you're free to leave. We'll need a formal statement, but you can provide it downtown later. For now, head on out." Riley nodded once. She bent to retrieve her worn backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and tugged her black T-shirt straight, the darkened wine stain now concealed. She turned to Judge Harold Bennett. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "Go do great things, kid," the judge replied with a subtle wink behind his glasses. "I'll manage the paperwork." Riley moved toward the exit, passing directly by the two restrained young men. Connor, bent forward with his costly jacket rucked up awkwardly, lifted his head as she neared. His eyes burned red with hatred and bewildered shock. He still couldn't comprehend how his world had inverted so completely. "You're finished," he hissed, the threat hollow and toothless. "My dad will ruin you." Riley maintained her steady pace without glancing down or reacting. To her, he was no longer a threat, merely a hurdle already cleared. The indifference wounded him more deeply than any counterattack could have. She passed Stephanie in the galley. The flight attendant shrank against the carts, avoiding all eye contact in sudden fear. Riley ignored her as well and stepped through the aircraft door. Cool, conditioned air from the jet bridge washed over her face, carrying faint traces of jet fuel and unmistakable liberation. The frantic voices behind her faded, absorbed by the long metal tunnel. Riley ascended the ramp with light, unhurried steps. Fatigue, hunger, and the sticky residue of wine lingered, but her core remained untouched and resolute. She emerged through the secure doors into the arrivals hall, expecting perhaps a driver with a sign or the usual taxi queue. She halted. The normally bustling area of joyful reunions and hurried travelers had quieted in one large section, an island of stillness amid the flow. 20 individuals stood in precise formation, creating a pocket of perfect order within the airport chaos. They wore crisp white gi uniforms, black belts weathered and frayed from decades of rigorous use, hands clasped behind backs, feet at exact shoulder width. They embodied living statues of discipline. At the head stood a silver-haired man whose sharp eyes seemed capable of slicing through steel. As Riley stepped fully into the terminal, the 20 martial artists remained silent, no cheers, no gestures. At a single guttural command from the leader, they executed in flawless unison. 20 backs straightened further, 20 heads bowed in a synchronized, sweeping arc of deep respect. Such a salute was typically reserved for visiting grand masters or dignitaries.
Here, in the middle of a busy international airport, it honored an 18-year-old in a wine-stained T-shirt. Master Liam Chen stood foremost, 60 years old, yet appearing hewn from enduring hardwood. His presence exerted a quiet gravity that reshaped the surrounding frenzy. He did not return the bow. He observed Riley closely, missing nothing. The slight slump of exhaustion in her shoulders, the lingering redness on her cheek, the unwavering clarity in her eyes. Riley stopped, set down her bag, brought her feet together, and bowed profoundly. She held the deep reverence for 3 full seconds. "Bosu-sensei," she whispered. Master Liam Chen stepped forward and rested a steady hand on her shoulder. "You faced considerable turbulence," he observed. "Yes, sensei," she replied, straightening, "but I held my center." "Well done," he affirmed, glancing at the dark stain on her shirt. "A uniform marked in defense of honor is far cleaner than any suit worn in cowardice." The serene moment shattered with an abrupt surge of aggressive energy. From the far VIP entrance, a man barreled through like an oncoming storm. Alexander Hale advanced with furious momentum, clad in a bespoke 3-piece suit worth more than most cars. 2 briefcase-carrying associates flanked him, corporate creditors primed for battle. Hale scanned the hall, face flushed with the outrage of a man unaccustomed to denial. He sought the supposed violent attacker his son had described. Instead, he spotted the police escort emerging behind Riley. Chief Marcus Reed and his officers appeared through the doors, firmly guiding Connor, who resisted, and Tanner, who was tearful. Connor caught sight of his father. Desperate, ugly hope flared. "Dad!" he yelled, straining against the cuffs. "Dad, help! They arrested me! Arrest them instead!" Alexander Hale froze, mind reeling at the sight of his prized heir shackled like an ordinary offender. Bruises marked Connor's face. Shock swiftly transformed into unbridled fury. Hale charged the police line. "Remove those officers from my son immediately." Chief Marcus Reed planted himself solidly in front, blocking the path with his broad frame. "Step back, sir. This is an active custodial transfer." "Do you know who I am?" Hale bellowed, spittle flying.
"I am Alexander Hale," he thundered. "I own the hangar where this aircraft is parked. I will have your badge, your pension, everything. Release my son immediately and arrest that thug standing over there." He jabbed a trembling finger toward Riley, who remained composed beside Master Liam Chen. "That girl viciously assaulted my son," Hale lied, repeating the distorted version his son had fed him. "She is a public menace." Chief Marcus Reed did not flinch or even glance at Hale. His gaze moved past the raging billionaire to the silver-haired figure in the white gi. The chief's stern features softened into the respectful demeanor of a former student. "Sensei Chen," Reed said with a deferential nod. "It's an honor to see you again." Hale blinked in confusion. "Sensei? What the hell is going on here?" Master Liam Chen advanced without a sound, canvas shoes silent on the terminal floor. He stopped mere inches from Alexander Hale. Physically, they were similar in height, yet the master seemed to loom far larger. "Alexander," Chen said quietly, his calm voice cutting sharply through the other's frenzy, "your son is not the victim here. He is the symptom of a deeper problem." Hale suddenly recognized the man. Chen was no ordinary instructor. He was a community pillar, director of self-defense training at the police academy, member of the city's youth advisory board, the very person who had taught breathing, focus, and restraint to half the department. "Stay out of this, Chen," Hale growled, though uncertainty crept into his tone. "This is a legal and financial matter. My attorneys will bury all of you." "Attorneys cannot bury truth," a new voice interjected firmly. Judge Harold Bennett emerged from the secure doors, leather satchel in hand. His slight limp seemed to disappear as he approached, taking position beside Master Liam Chen and completing an unbreakable line. Hale's eyes darted between the Grand Master and the retired justice. Color drained from his face.
A chilling realization settled. He was not battling a lone young woman. He was confronting two foundational pillars of the city's integrity, discipline and law. "Judge Bennett," Hale stammered, "you're representing her?" "I am testifying against you and your son," the judge corrected, eyes icy behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I possess comprehensive evidence, video and audio. Your son committed a hate crime, and you have just attempted to intimidate a sworn officer." The arrivals hall fell into hushed stillness. The confrontation was fully encircled. On one side stood Alexander Hale, gripping his wealth and entitlement like weapons. On the other, the judge, the master, and the police chief, a triad of principled authority no fortune could purchase. At the center, appearing smallest yet projecting the strongest presence, stood Riley. "You have two options, Mr. Hale," Master Liam Chen said softly. "Step aside and allow justice to proceed, or join your son in custody for obstruction." The precinct interrogation room carried the stale scent of old coffee and harsh cleaner. It was a stark, windowless space built to erode confidence. Riley sat on one side of the scarred metal table, hands resting calmly on the cold surface. She had washed the wine from her face, but the dark stain on her shirt remained a silent reminder of the day's ordeal. The door buzzed and swung open. Alexander Hale entered, no longer the frantic father from the airport, but a calculated executive closing a high-stakes deal. Jacket draped over one arm, tie loosened just enough to suggest pressure. His eyes stayed keen and appraising. He signaled the guard to leave. The heavy door clanged shut. Hale pulled out the opposite chair, but did not sit right away. He paced to the corner, turning his back briefly to assert control. "You've created quite a disruption," he said smoothly, voice stripped of earlier hysteria. He was back in his element, negotiation. Riley watched without response as he moved. Hale turned abruptly. He planted his knuckles on the table and leaned in. "My son is foolish. I acknowledge he's spoiled and impulsive, but he is not a criminal." "The law says otherwise," Riley replied evenly, her words echoing faintly in the small room. Hale dismissed the statement with a wave. "Law is flexible for those who understand leverage. Right now, you're pushing against a barrier that will eventually crush you." He reached into his jacket, withdrew a luxurious leather checkbook, and flipped it open. Uncapping a gold fountain pen, he wrote with deliberate strokes, the scratch of nib on paper, the only sound. With a crisp tear, he detached the check and slid it across the table until it stopped just short of Riley's fingers. $50,000, he announced, a thin predator smile. Tax-free, immediately cashable, a substantial sum for someone in your position. It could fund education, a vehicle, even relocate your family from whatever area you call home. Riley regarded the check and its string of zeros. "You want me to withdraw the charges," she stated. "I want practicality," Hale corrected. "You speak to the chief, claim misunderstanding, say Connor merely bumped you and the elderly gentleman misinterpreted events. You leave with $50,000. We all move forward with a valuable lesson." He leaned back, certain the offer would seal agreement. In his experience, everyone had a price. "Consider it carefully," he continued, condescension thick. "This equates perhaps a decade of your projected earnings. You're young, starting out with limited resources. Don't let pride leave you destitute." Riley reached out slowly. She lifted the check. Hale's smile broadened. He had prevailed again. Riley held it to the light, examining as if checking authenticity. Then, with measured intent, she tore it cleanly in half. Hale's expression faltered. She aligned the pieces and tore again, repeating until only confetti remained. She let the shredded paper flutter onto the table. "Do you believe this is about money?" Riley asked, voice quiet but infused with controlled intensity that filled the room. "You think you can purchase my suffering, acquire my self-respect, the same way you bought your son's seat?"
She rose and mirrored his earlier lean across the table. "My dignity is not for sale, Mr. Hale, least of all to a father who failed to instill basic humanity in his child. You created a bully, and now you seek to pay me to sustain him." Hale's face flushed deep crimson. "You foolish girl, you're discarding a fortune. You think you can challenge me? I'll drown you in lawsuits. I'll destroy your reputation. You are welcome to try, but you cannot purchase what I possess." Hale slammed his fist on the table. "I'm extending a lifeline. Take it." The door behind him buzzed loudly and burst open. Judge Harold Bennett stood framed in the entrance, Chief Marcus Reed beside him. The judge held his phone prominently, recording indicator active. "Actually, Alexander," Judge Bennett said as he entered, "she just handed you an anchor, and you've tied it securely around your own neck." Hale whirled. "Harold, this is private." "This is a police interrogation room," Judge Bennett countered sharply. "Privacy does not exist here, and I just overheard you attempting to bribe a witness in an active federal case." The judge approached the table, noting the scattered paper scraps, then met Riley's eyes with clear admiration. "Bribery, witness tampering, obstruction of justice," he enumerated, counting on his fingers. "All serious felonies, Alexander." Hale retreated until his back met the wall, the foundations of his untouchable world crumbling. "It was merely a settlement discussion," he protested weakly. "No," the judge replied, shaking his head. "It was proof of exactly why your son became what he is, like father, like son." He turned to Chief Marcus Reed. "Chief Reed, I believe we require another set of restraints." Reed advanced, removing cuffs from his belt. "Turn around, Mr. Hale." Riley observed as the billionaire was placed in handcuffs. She felt no triumph, only a profound sense of equilibrium returning. In an era where information spread instantly, justice here traveled at the speed of sound. The recording from Judge Harold Bennett's iPad did not merely surface, it exploded across every platform.
By the evening news cycle, the 3-minute clip had aired on every major network, from CNN to Fox News. It wasn't blurry or open to interpretation. It was crystal clear audio, capturing unfiltered malice. Millions of Americans leaned closer to their televisions, volume turned high. They heard the unmistakable nasal sneer of Connor Hale. They heard the vile racial slurs uttered with the easy arrogance of someone who had never faced repercussions. They heard the nauseating wet smack of a palm striking flesh. And then they heard the profound silence, the iron discipline of the young woman who refused to scream, but instead delivered a precise, devastating response. The public reaction was explosive. For the demographic that carried the most weight, retirees, grandparents, those who funded pensions, this transcended mere social media outrage. It struck at core values. It was a blatant violation of long-held standards of decency. In Connor's voice, they recognized every bully they had ever loathed. They heard the erosion of civility. They heard entitled wealth scorning the dignity of honest effort. The stock ticker for Hale Atlantic Airways plunged into deep red. By the close of trading in New York, the company had lost $4 billion in market value. Yet the saga still held one final twist of deception. Stephanie Cole, the flight attendant who had enabled the abuse, chose to roll the dice. Guided by a crisis PR firm funded by the airline, she appeared on Morning View, a widely watched talk show known for gentle interviews. Studio lights were lowered for intimacy. Stephanie sat on a neutral sofa, clutching a tissue, face bare of makeup, hair in a simple ponytail. She projected the image of an exhausted, traumatized working mother. "I was absolutely terrified," she sobbed, patting dry eyes. "You have to understand, 30,000 feet in the air is an unpredictable environment. When that young woman stood up, the look in her eyes, I genuinely thought she might try to take over the plane. I was only trying to protect everyone. I was trying to calm the situation."
The host nodded with practiced empathy. So you felt genuinely threatened by her? You believed she was the aggressor? Without question, Stephanie insisted, voice quivering with rehearsed vulnerability. Mr. Hale was just sitting quietly. He's barely more than a boy. Polite, well-mannered, he simply asked for water, and suddenly she was attacking him. I tried to step in, but I'm only a flight attendant, not security. For a brief moment, the strategy appeared effective. Public opinion wavered. Was the audio misrepresented? Was the elderly judge prejudiced? Then the online world countered decisively. An alert flashed on the producer's monitor. A new hashtag surged to worldwide trending #1. It read, #TheRealStephanie. A passenger from seat 3C, the same man Connor had paid to vacate his spot, had recorded as well. He missed the physical confrontation, but captured everything leading up to it. The host paused, listening to her earpiece. Her expression shifted from warmth to uncertainty, then to cool professionalism. "Stephanie," the host said, tone dropping noticeably, "we've just received footage submitted by another passenger from Flight 812. We're going to air it now." Stephanie's face drained of color. "What footage?" The large screen behind them activated. Though handheld and slightly unsteady, the video was unmistakably clear, depicting the immediate aftermath of the wine incident. Connor stood smirking, empty glass in hand. Riley was visible in the aisle, red wine streaming down her chin and saturating her white hoodie. And there was Stephanie, not cowering in fear, not alarmed. Instead, she hurried past the soaked young woman to tend to Connor, offering him a warm towel. "Oh, Mr. Hale, I'm so terribly sorry," that recorded Stephanie cooed, voice thick with deference. "Did it ruin your cuffs? Let me fetch sparkling water." Then recorded Stephanie turned to Riley, features contorted in disdain. "Look at the mess you've made. You caused him to spill a $50 glass of wine. Can't you remain seated? You're disturbing the entire premium service." The studio audience inhaled sharply in unison, a collective gasp that seemed to vacuum the air from the set. The disparity was devastating. The weeping, vulnerable Stephanie on the couch sat paralyzed, staring at her on-screen counterpart, the embodiment of corporate favoritism. The deception didn't fracture, it disintegrated. The host faced her guest again. All trace of sympathy had vanished. "You claim to be terrified of the young woman, yet this video shows you apologizing to the man who deliberately threw wine on her. It shows you blaming the victim. How do you account for that?" Stephanie's mouth opened, but nothing emerged. Her gaze darted wildly toward the camera like a cornered creature. The carefully constructed facade had collapsed, exposing raw prejudice beneath. Across living rooms in Florida, Arizona, and Texas, viewers switched channels in revulsion. The airline's customer service lines lit up instantly. Thousands of elite, high-value frequent flyers, the most loyal and profitable, called to cancel memberships and destroy their platinum cards. They could tolerate delays, they could overlook lost luggage, but they would not tolerate a company that shielded a liar who had humiliated a young woman on national television.
They could overlook delayed flights or misplaced bags, but they drew an unbreakable line at a corporation shielding a liar who had publicly humiliated and enabled the abuse of a young woman on live television. In the executive boardroom of Hale Atlantic Airways, the CEO stared at screens as the stock plunged another 12% in mere minutes. Stephanie Cole's interview footage had delivered the killing blow. Public outrage had evolved beyond calls for justice. It now demanded full accountability. The CEO lifted the receiver with unsteady hands. "Prepare the press statement immediately," he directed, voice betraying rare tremor. "Terminate the flight attendant without delay, and remove Alexander Hale from his board position. Excise the problem before it destroys the entire company." The federal courthouse in Seattle stood like a solemn temple of dark mahogany and cool marble, intentionally designed to diminish those who entered.
In courtroom 4B, the atmosphere carried the faint scent of polish and subdued anxiety. No luxury amenities existed here, no crystal glasses, no plush reclining seats, only the oppressive gravity of irreversible outcomes. Connor Hale stood before the bench, stripped of his designer jacket, now held as evidence, and his Rolex, locked away in storage. He wore a plain, poorly fitted gray suit supplied by his attorneys. Beside him, Tanner Brooks shook visibly, gaze fixed on the worn floor, a pale shadow of the aggressive youth who had once blocked the aircraft aisle. In the public gallery, Alexander Hale sat isolated, no longer resembling a commanding tycoon. Hours earlier, the Hale Atlantic Board had held an urgent session and voted unanimously to revoke his chairmanship. The catastrophic stock decline required a scapegoat, and Alexander became it. He hunched forward, head buried in his hands, an empire builder reduced by his son's entitlement and a short audio clip. The presiding judge adjusted his robes. With steel gray hair and austere features, he was a longtime peer of Judge Harold Bennett. He lifted the plea document, studying it through glasses that amplified the evident disillusionment in his eyes. "Connor Hale," Judge Sterling intoned, voice resounding through the vast chamber without amplification, "you have entered guilty pleas to 1 count of simple assault and 1 count of interference with flight crew enhanced by hate crime provisions. Do you comprehend the seriousness of these admissions?" "Yes, Your Honor," Connor murmured, his once nasal arrogance replaced by a hoarse whisper. "I have reviewed the recording," Sterling continued, setting the iPad down as though it carried contamination. "It was deeply disturbing. I heard a young man convinced that wealth grants license to treat others as objects. You confused privilege with strength. You mistook restraint for vulnerability." The judge leaned forward, the bench creaking under his weight. "Your counsel has requested probation, citing youth, clean record, and the claim that incarceration would ruin your prospects." He paused, letting the words settle. He turned his attention to Riley, seated calmly in the front row wearing a crisp, fresh blouse, flanked by Master Lim Chen. "Ordinarily, I might concur that prison is too severe for a first offense," Sterling resumed. "Yet justice demands equilibrium. You sought to degrade this young woman in a public forum. Therefore, your consequence must carry equal visibility. I reject routine probation." Connor's lawyer tensed. "Your Honor." "Quiet," Sterling commanded. He raised his gavel. "Connor Hale and Tanner Brooks, I sentence you both to 6 months of court-mandated community service." Connor exhaled sharply in tentative relief. Community service, he could manage that, perhaps office work or serving meals. But Sterling lifted a cautionary finger. "You will not shuffle paperwork. You will not remain hidden in back offices. Your offenses occurred at SeaTac. You profaned a vital public facility. Accordingly, you will serve your sentence on site." The judge's gaze bored into Connor. "You are assigned to sanitation crew. You will maintain the terminals. You will empty waste bins. You will scrub floors in the very spaces where you once strutted with superiority. You will wear high-visibility vests identifying your status. You will learn, through honest labor, precisely what it means to be the help you once scorned." A ripple of reaction passed through the courtroom. The punishment was crafted not merely to penalize, but to dismantle ingrained arrogance. "You will empty the trash bins. You will scrub the floors of the very concourses where you once strode with the confidence of ownership. You will wear a bright neon vest that openly identifies your court-ordered status. You will come to understand, through the ache of earnest physical work and the sweat of genuine effort, precisely what it feels like to be the help you once looked down upon with such contempt." A sharp collective gasp swept through the modest courtroom. It was a sentence meticulously crafted not merely to penalize wrongdoing, but to systematically dismantle a deeply entrenched sense of superiority. Furthermore, Judge Harold Bennett continued, delivering the concluding and most stinging provisions, you are hereby placed on the federal no-fly list for a full 5 years, and you are permanently prohibited from ever flying Hale Atlantic Airways again. You will remain grounded until you demonstrate the ability to behave properly among others. Alexander Hale visibly recoiled in the gallery. His only son was now forever barred from the airline that bore the family name, a cruel and poetic reversal. Finally, Judge Harold Bennett turned his attention to Riley. You will compose a formal written apology to the victim and deliver it aloud to her in person today, without omission or alteration. Case closed. The gavel fell with resounding finality. Bang! It echoed like the slamming of an iron gate. The world Connor had known, the exclusive parties, private jets, the impenetrable shield of inherited privilege, was irrevocably ended. He turned toward his father for some sign of support, but Alexander Hale looked away, unable to meet the weight of shared shame. 2 bailiffs stepped forward. They did not apply cuffs this time, yet they seized his arms with firm authority and guided him toward processing. He passed directly in front of Riley. He wanted to muster a defiant glare, a cutting remark, anything to salvage pride, but her steady gaze reflected only his own diminished reality. He lowered his eyes and allowed himself to be led away without resistance. Outside the courthouse doors, steady rain began to fall, cleansing the streets of accumulated grime. Yet no amount of water could fully wash away the enduring mark on the Hale reputation. The fall from entitled prince to humble laborer had officially begun. The precinct briefing room was cold and unforgiving, bathed in the harsh glare of overhead fluorescence. It was a space meant for extracting confessions, but today it served as a stage for profound public humbling. Connor stood alone in the center. The metamorphosis was stark and complete. Gone were the tailored Italian fabrics and the practiced arrogant smirk. In their stead, he wore a glaring neon yellow safety vest layered over drab gray jumpsuit, the standard uniform of airport sanitation workers. A single crumpled sheet of paper trembled noticeably in his unsteady grip. Riley stood 5 feet distant. She did not fold her arms in judgment or display any hint of triumph. She simply waited, her calm presence imposing a heavier burden than any words could. "Read it aloud," Officer Stone instructed from the doorway. Connor swallowed with difficulty. He glanced down at the page, then briefly up at Riley. He found no trace of sympathy, only the unflinching mirror of his own downfall. "I, Connor Hale," he began, voice cracking under the strain, "offer my formal apology to you, Riley Quinn. I apologize for the derogatory and hateful language I used. I apologize for my physical aggression and threats. I acted without any sense of honor or decency." He paused, the words bitter on his tongue. Every forced syllable drove deeper into the remnants of his ego. "I recognize that my actions stemmed from ignorance, prejudice, and an unearned belief in my own superiority," Connor continued, reciting the court-required text. "I deeply regret the harm and fear I caused. I fully accept the consequences imposed upon me." He lowered the paper slowly. The ensuing silence felt thick and suffocating, pressing in from all sides. He waited expectantly for some softening, perhaps an "it's okay" or polite acceptance that society often extended to contrite young men of means. None arrived. Riley took one deliberate step forward. The soft squeak of her sneaker on the linoleum rang louder than any shout. "I heard every word," she said, voice quiet yet carrying immovable weight. "But I have no need for your apology, Connor. My justice is already secured." She glanced briefly at the glaring vest, then directly into her eyes. "You believed true power came from a credit card and family name. You thought strength lay in making others feel small and afraid. You were profoundly wrong. Genuine strength protects the vulnerable rather than breaking them. Carry that thought with you while you scrape gum from terminal floors and empty overflowing bins." She offered no pause for reply. With a precise military sharp turn on her heel, she exited the room, leaving him isolated in the fluorescent glow, forever trapped in the harsh reality he himself had engineered. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the high dojo windows in Oakland, transforming drifting dust motes into flecks of gold. The air carried the familiar blend of polished wood, honest sweat, and focused discipline. It was a true sanctuary, worlds apart from the airplane's confining steel and the courthouse's cold formality. Riley stood at the head of the training mat. She wore a crisp white G secured by a black belt, frayed from countless years of dedicated practice. The heavy cotton fabric snapped crisply with her controlled movements. Facing her, in perfect rows, sat 30 young students, a beautiful cross-section of America, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, all seated in precise seiza, backs romstrawed straight, eyes shining with respect and curiosity. "Stop!" Riley commanded, voice ringing clear and authoritative. The entire class froze instantly. "Why do we bow?" she asked, pacing slowly along the lines. A small boy raised his hand eagerly. "To be polite, Sensei." "That is part of it," Riley confirmed with an approving nod. She paused, taking in the eager, diverse faces turned toward her. Memories flickered. The flight's harassment, the spilled wine, the critical moment she chose restraint over unchecked rage. "We bow because violence itself is easy," she explained to them. "Any fool can lash out with a fist. Any coward can choose cruelty. But to master your own power, to extend dignity even to someone who has shown you none, that is the true challenge. That is what separates a mere fighter from a warrior." She returned to the front. "Ray!" 30 young heads bowed in perfect, flowing unison, a wave of sincere respect. In the shadowed rear corner near the entrance, an older figure observed quietly. Judge Harold Bennett leaned lightly on his cane, warmth crinkling the corners of his eyes in a gentle smile. He had witnessed the legal system deliver punishment to the guilty, but this sight was far more hopeful, the active building of a better future. Riley glanced up and met his gaze. She offered no wave, only the traditional gesture of fist to palm and a deep, respectful bow. The judge returned a subtle nod, then turned to leave, reassured that capable hands now held the world's tomorrow. Riley faced her class once more. She drew a steadying breath, centering herself fully. "Ki-ai!" She launched skyward, a flawless spinning aerial kick, a whirlwind of white fabric and pure focused energy. For one suspended instant, she floated in the golden light, transcending gravity, prejudice, and the burdens of the past. Riley's story illustrates a timeless principle.
Arrogance may seize fleeting moments, but character ultimately prevails. We watched Connor Hale mistake his father's fortune for personal authority, convinced he could trample anyone in his path. He learned the hard way that dignity cannot be bought with any card. It is forged daily through discipline, patience, and self-mastery. Riley did not simply defeat a bully with physical skill. She overcame